In this episode of the Backpacking Light podcast, I'm chatting with gear designer, biologist, and brand new father Dan Durston about his shelters, his packs, his design philosophy, his adventures, and more. Stick around.
Look for me in the mountains where walking has a way of pulling you to your peace of mind every day.
Hey everybody, this is Ryan Jordan. In today's podcast, we are featuring Backpacking Light community member and gear designer and founder of Durston Gear, Dan Durston. Before we get to that interview, I want to announce a change in our podcast format. Starting with this episode, the public will be able to get the video version of this podcast on our YouTube channel. So I'll put a link to that in the show notes, and Unlimited members will continue to receive the long form video version of this podcast, and that will be available at the podcast show page at backpackinglight.com/podcasts. This podcast is 100% advertising free and will continue to remain so. It's supported by backpackinglight.com membership fees. So if you would like to support this podcast and you're getting value from it, please consider becoming a backpackinglight.com member. You can do so at backpackinglight.com/membership. Thank you very much for your support. We really appreciate it, and we're having a ton of fun producing this podcast for you. Okay, on with the interview with Dan.
My guest today is a gear designer and adventurer with 20 years of experience and thousands of nights in the outdoors. He's completed through hikes of the Pacific Crest Trail, a yo-yo of Canada's Great Divide Trail, and is the 5-time fastest finisher of the Bob Marshall Wilderness Open, amongst other notable achievements. Dan Durston is based in Golden, British Columbia, where in addition to designing and building gear, he is an extremely active member of several online backpacking communities, including Backpacking Light. He's been building his own gear for over a decade, and along with his wife T, who is also an accomplished outdoors person, they launched their first commercial venture in partnership with Drop.com in 2018. Since then, their company, Durston Gear, has released several buzzy products, including their most recent creation, the extraordinarily popular Durston X-Mid Pro 2. Dan, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Great really excited. Yeah, really excited about this. We've talked a lot over email over the years, but this is the first face-to-face conversation, so I'm really excited about it. Let's just jump right in. Tell me the story of Durston Gear. Like, what's your background, and how did you get from where you were as sort of like in the civilian life, so to speak, to being this gear designer?
Yeah, it was like a total fluke, really. I joined Backpacking Light around 2007-ish, and I immediately loved like the geekery and all that fun stuff. So I started sewing my own gear a couple years in, just learning how on like terrible sewing machines, and I was just picky. It's like you get a piece of gear and you're already cutting it up and changing all that kind of stuff. But I never set out to like do anything commercial. I don't think I really have the courage for that. It's kind of weird. But I had over the years, just from being like really involved in the community, connected with a few companies and was kind of doing a bit of gear testing for them. And this one company, Drop, who used to be called Mass Drop, they had reached out when I was doing my yo-yo through hike of the Great Divide Trail. And they wanted to give me some hiking poles. They were just kind of handing them out to everybody at the time, just trying to get the word out. So I was like, yeah, sure, take some hiking poles, took them on the hike, and then after the hike, we were just chatting. And they were like, hey, we want to do outdoor products. And so they were just like, do you have any cool ideas? And like in parallel to all this, when I hiked the Pacific Crest Trail in 2014, I'm always thinking about gear. Like, I'm not purely a gearhead. I love the mountains and the plants and all that kind of stuff. But when it's just like kind of simple trail, I'm just like thinking about gear and what could be better, that kind of stuff. And so on the PCT in 2014, I was thinking about like, how could we make tents better? Because I was using a trekking pole tent, but I was always like, felt like they're too complicated. Like, I could master it when I'm hiking every day, but like so many people that are out for the weekend are just like struggling with it. And I really like the simplicity of pyramid tents. I was using also some pyramid tents from MLD that were awesome. And for those, I just didn't like how there's only one pole and the only high spot you can't sit there because the pole's there. And I was like, I got two poles. Like, there's got to be a better way. And so on the PCT, I was thinking about like, how can I do this? How can I improve some of the shortcomings of the mids without adding all the complexity that I see in most of the other trekking pole tents? And I was on the wrong track really on the PCT because I was always thinking about ways to make it complicated. I was like, oh, like maybe like a big hoop around the top or like some weird corner struts, and like everything I did was like, yeah, like it's better, but it creates all these new problems too. And I wasn't like stoked about anything. And so a few years later, like life goes by and day-to-day life, you don't think about gear as much because you're just caught up in day-to-day life. But when I got back on the Great Divide Trail in 2017, I'm back in that same mindset, hiking all day, starting to daydream. And at that point, I realized with more of a minimalist philosophy that like if I have two poles, like there's got to be a solution with the two poles, and not adding all these like extra struts and hoops and guy lines and the kind of stuff I'm trying to avoid in the first place. And so we were hiking, we were bushwhacking, we were in one of the most remote parts of the Great Divide Trail, and it's just like mosquitoes all day. Mm-hmm. So I'm just kind of like spacing out, thinking about gear. And I finally realized that like if I'm going to put two poles inside a rectangle, they can't be near the edge because then the wall's flat and you need a guy line. So it's two poles kind of near the middle. And if I'm going to sleep in there too, the only way that's going to work is if they're on one diagonal and I'm on the other. And I was like, so as soon as I like actually understood the question of like, you know, it can't be strolls and putts, so it can't be struts and hoops, it can't be near the edge, it's got to be two poles. Once you really boil it down to like the core parameters, then I was like, that's the only way you could do it. So I had this idea on the Great Divide Trail, and I was just thinking, oh, that'd be cool. Like after the trail, maybe I'll sew one up for myself. Like if I get around to it, it's so much work building like anything. But as I said before, Massdrop had given me these poles for the hike, and after the hike, they were just like, hey, we want to do products. And so I was like, oh, well, like I have this idea for a tent, and you know, I just gonna make one for me. But like if you guys want to like actually do it professionally, like sweet. Like I was just thinking like maybe I could get a free one out of it that's like actually made by somebody right. who can sew way better right. than me. So yeah, my motivation was just like, hey, if I get a sweet tent like built by a real factory and it's how I want it, like that's awesome. So yeah, they just figured out a lot of the supply chain stuff, and it just kind of it went from there.
And do you have a background in engineering or design?
No, so I'm a biologist, mostly like fish and water biologist. I've always been like kind of a geeky person, like you know the spreadsheets in Excel and things like that. But I don't have a design background at all. I don't know how to use all those cool programs that like real designers use. I'm like, I draw everything in 2D, which isn't great because like when you want to change something, you've got like a professional designer will draw it in 3D and then they'll like export that into all these 2D drawings and it's all right there. But I should learn those programs. I just haven't had time. So I'm just like drawing everything to scale in like Adobe Illustrator or even just like PowerPoint.
PowerPoint?
Like the Mac version of PowerPoint.
Yeah.
That's just how I did all like the original X-Men drawings, yeah.
That's fascinating. So, okay, I want to dive into this process a little bit because I think to me it's even more fascinating like that you kind of approach this from a generalist kind of non-specialist mindset. Did Drop say to you like, oh, okay, we need like did you just send them like a file and they were like, okay, we'll make this, or was there a back and forth? Like how did that work?
Yeah, so it was I mean, I think it was really like one of a kind. And so I don't have a design background, but what I think I do bring is like a user background, which is often missing. You can have these designers that are like so focused on like, you know, minimizing waste or like how everything, you know, certain things about engineering, but it's just like, yeah, but does it work? Is it intuitive? Like when I'm tired at the end of a long day, is that going to be a pain? Like all that kind of stuff. Just basic things like when you reach out the tent to close the door, is it like too long of a reach? and somebody that's not really camping and you have to kind of crawl out and put a hand in the vestibule, like that kind of stuff. That only really comes with experience. So that's kind of my strengths that I think I brought to it. But for the actual process, like there was this guy that actually used to write for Backpacking Light, Danny Milks. He wrote a few articles, maybe like 2010, 2012. And he ended up getting hired by Drop to run their outdoors community. And he was awesome. And so when I first sent him the sketch, he was just like, why has nobody done this? And I was like, I don't know. Like, it seems good, but like, I don't know either. Cause like, I haven't been in design circles forever. It just like seems good. And so we went back and forth on it. And he was just kind of like, you sure we don't want like a hexagon? And I'm like, no, like it's gotta be simple. And so we kind of went back and forth on the basic thing. But then we were only like 2 months in, which is like nothing. And he actually quit. He went on parental leave, I think it was. I never really even like heard anything. It was just like an email from somebody else one day. By the way, like Danny has left. And I was like, oh, shoot. So anyways, there was another person there that ran like apparel, all the clothing. And she really had no interest in like the tents. She was just like, hey, you just like do whatever you want. And so I was like, okay. So they had the factory, and the thing that's awesome is that the factory is incredible. They build for like MSR and Black Diamond, and if you don't tell them how to do something, they do something smart. And so they're helpful that way. Like all they do is build tents. So if they see something that's like, oh, like this door is going to be too low, they'll like tell you. They won't just like make you a prototype that's terrible. But yeah, so all that really happened is I'm just like trying my best to figure this out, like kind of by myself. And she's just like relaying directions to this factory. We go back and forth. And I think it just kind of worked.
Yeah, we probably ought to back up just a little bit. And I'm wondering if you can explain, someone who's never seen an X-Mid, could you explain what makes an X-Mid an X-Mid?
Yeah, so the X-Mid is my kind of name for our trekking pole shelter, and we have a few different versions, but essentially what it is it's a trekking pole shelter where the base is a rectangle, and then inside that you sleep on a diagonal. So there's actually vestibules inside the rectangle fly, and it sets up with your two hiking poles on the opposite diagonal. So we call it an X-Mid because X is referring to that like crossing diagonals of you sleeping one way, poles crossing the other, and mid is short for pyramid, which is really, it's not really a pyramid, but it's kind of a homage to the rectangle base that pyramids traditionally have.
Right, the simplicity and stability of a mid shelter, but solving those problems that you identified earlier.
Yeah. So that's what we came up, the X-Mid, just kind of like layout of these two crossing diagonals was kind of the core idea. Mm-hmm. And then we have 3 different versions of it now.
So talk to me about first principles design. That's something that you mention on your website is kind of like how you approach design problems.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that's whenever I've designed a bunch of stuff like for myself over the years, and often it doesn't work out when I try to do 2 things, which is 1, make it good at everything, or B, try to start with something pre-existing and like manipulate it into something else. You might have like a pack that's, a fast packing pack or something, and you want to make it better at load carrying, and so you add in a whole bunch of stuff, but it just ends up confused. So when I talk about first principles design, what I'm really meaning there is starting from like a clean sheet of paper and really thinking about the very core questions that are going to shape everything else. So for the X-Mid, one of the main ones was the rectangle base. Like that's going to be simple to pitch because it's 4 stakes and it's a 90-degree angle. So it's not like weird measuring distances and things like that. So I felt like that is like, from a user perspective, it's the best, and from an efficiency perspective, because it's a lot fewer seams and things like that. So with the X-Mid, I was just really thinking about like what shapes are the best, how many poles, just those really big questions. And if you get those big questions right, you're always going to run into some problems along the way where you kind of got to troubleshoot some things and figure out some solutions. But if you start with the big things right, then hopefully there's not too much of that. Whereas if you're starting with like the wrong thing, then all you're doing is like, oh, the headroom's not good, so let's add this. So there's no spot for a vent, so like we'll add like a hood, like, and it just gets complicated and convoluted and heavy.
So you designed the X Mid, one P, and then you got into a 2-person version of the same shelter, and you use polyester over nylon, correct? Yeah. Can you?
Yeah.
Sometimes this is contentious, and sometimes it's not. It depends on who you're talking to. So give me your elevator pitch for poly use in shelters.
Yeah, it's kind of a funny one. So we're absolutely not the first to use poly, but
Right.
we did use poly in a shelter that got super popular, and so I ended up kind of like almost like the spokesperson for poly, where everyone was kind of like, it's kind of the poly tent that everyone thought of. Um, but basically, this also kind of comes down to first principles, which is that with a trekking pole shelter, the fabric is part of the structure. Like your pole tips are all held together and held in place by the fabric. Unlike a tradition, like a freestanding tent, where the poles are with or without the fabric, they have their structure. So if you have a fabric that's part of the structure, but it actually expands and gets loose when wet, as nylon does, then it's unavoidably becoming structurally unsound as it gets wet. Now, maybe it's not, I mean, it's been used forever. It's not like disaster and like
Right.
you'll die if you go use it or anything like
Right.
that. But I just felt like from a kind of like first principles basic starting point, I really want to start with a material that is not going to be structurally unsound, because there's your whole hierarchy of needs. And I guess when I say first principles, you're thinking about like the hierarchy of things where there's really core essential things, which are what you think about first. And then there's all the later things. And with a shelter, I think being structurally sound is like right there on like the ground level of the most core things.
What's your shelter hierarchy of needs? Can you run it? Run it down for us?
Yeah. Yeah, I'll try off the cuff. One thing I'm a little different on than other people is that I feel like a lot of tent companies are just like structure, like we need to make the strongest thing. And I like obviously that's important, but usability can get lost in that. Where like, yeah, maybe it's like a little stronger if you use a certain way, but then like the doors are kind of short and annoying to use, and it's like not a big deal if you just like it's still going to be fine if you make the doors more usable. So for hierarchy of needs, I think like number one is that it's just like 100% you have to be able to trust it in the weather that you're going to be using it in. So it's basically it's stormworthiness, but not in like a exaggerated like get blown off the mountain. More in like a mundane stormworthiness, like it's definitely going to be waterproof. I'm going to be able to pitch it when I'm cold and I'm wet. I'm not going to like when it's windy, I'm still going to be able to set it up. Like the actual like real world kind of like
Right.
it's still going to work for me and keep me safe and dry and having a good time.
So stormworthiness is like the bottom of your pyramid.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't put a ton of thought into the pyramid, but I
Okay.
feel like that is just like, I mean, I have in certain things. I just haven't really thought of exactly a pyramid, but for sure, that's like non-negotiable in the sense that, like, if you get out there and your shelter leaks, it's just like you're losing before you're even starting, and nobody cares if it's like light or the pockets are cool or whatever. If it's just like if you're freezing, so that's like the most non-negotiable thing. And like a lot of stuff ties to that. Like the simplicity is pertaining to weight, but it's also pertaining to when the weather sucks and I just want to get this tent set up. That's also why it needs to be simple. So just like working in bad weather, because like any shelter is fine when you don't really need a shelter. When it's sunny and hot and there's no bugs, like it doesn't matter. But when the weather's bad, it's got to work. So that's like the hierarchy one, it's ground level. And then probably next is weight, because I really want to accomplish that at the lowest weight. You see, some people will say like they won't have weight as a high enough priority. So it will be like, oh, we made it stronger. And like, yeah, it's heavy, but like now it's so strong. But if it was already strong enough and now extra strength is just kind of academic. That's kind of one of the dangers I see in kind of some of the poly nylon debate. Like poly and nylon, there is differences in strength and there is like an edge for nylon, but it's not radical. It's smaller than like the coatings that you use, like sil versus pu is
Right.
I, my I mean, I haven't seen every fabric, but like my experience is that makes a much bigger difference than the fiber.
Yeah, it sounds like a design principle that you hold very dearly is trying to get the most bang for your buck. Like what's the biggest percentage that you can affect as opposed to like really worrying about something that's only going to make a fractional difference one way or the other. Is that accurate?
Yeah, yeah, I think so. Like when I got into backpacking light and I was really thinking about what does it mean to be ultralight, I always thought of it as like really having a super clear sense on what functionality you're trying to have. And that can be different for different environment, different trips, but you need to know what it is and be laser focused on that. And that's what I'm trying to do is like definitely deliver that, but don't deliver things that I don't need to deliver, like overkill strength or overkill space or something.
Right. So we've talked a lot about like overbuilding and stuff like that, but another very common problem with ultralight gear is sacrificing usability on the altar of gram savings. Did you find yourself in your design process struggling to find that middle path between not wanting to build it up too much, but then also like going too far in the other direction for the sake of weight?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So I found it the hardest at the start because I have one tent and you're trying to make it something that people are going to be receptive to. And some people are going to say, oh, that's too heavy. And other people are going to say, no, it's not bomber enough for me. And so you're trying to like keep everyone happy while realizing that you absolutely cannot keep everyone happy because if you try to like do both, it's going to just like get convoluted and like you want to be as efficient as you can, but you can't make the strongest tent that is also the lightest tent. So you that's kind of where one of my design philosophies of just like coherence or consistency comes in, where like I'm not going to make a tent that's got like crazy bomber fabrics and then like tiny little zippers. And you do see that sometime where like at least you can design everything about even. And then it's not. So that's why like with our pro tents, we use a lighter fabric, we use lighter zippers, we use like the floor is down one weight, everything's just like down a level, but it's still very like consistent and it's appealing to people that have a different kind of trade-off balance that they would find to be optimum for them.
Okay. Let's talk about packs for a second. So you when did you introduce your first uh, pack through drop?
Yeah, that was announced in summer 2019. I actually didn't get in people's hands till 2020.
Okay,
Kind
so
of
fairly
over.
recently. For some reason, I thought it was
Yeah,
longer ago than that. So,
yeah,
what was the process like of going from designing tents for a while to then moving into the world of packs?
yeah. So that it's so different. Like it's so different. So in a tent, a lot of it's like really clear cut, almost like math problems, like angles and areas and like is this enough space? Is this enough height? What's that length? All that kind of stuff. And you don't really have to think very much about the human gear interface. Like as long as the tent's big enough, like 90% of people fit and it's pretty simple. Whereas a pack, you've got all the fit side of it, like the shoulder straps, like all of a sudden now everybody's got like different shoulder shapes. And it's like in a tent, everybody's shoulders are still gonna like basically more or less fit in the tent. But on a pack, it's way more complicated. And so you're not just my tendency is to design something that works for me, which is not necessarily for everybody. And it's not just the harness, it's like pockets. Like tent pockets can just be like a big mesh pocket and they work and everybody likes them. Whereas on a pack, like a hip belt pocket, everybody's kind of got different stuff they want to put in there, and like some like them big, some like them. I mean, nobody likes them small, but some like them big and some like them huge.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And so, and then like shoulder strap pocket, like all these things, this like usability, human interface comes in, which is really hard to design to kind of by yourself, because you're just like, well, I think that's comfortable and easy to use, and
Mm-hmm.
But when you're just like one person, you don't have like, a testing team of 1,000 people to be like, oh, if somebody is like short but wide, then this will like rub on their collarbone. You're like, oh, okay, yeah, didn't see that.
So, what is your process of iteration look like then when dealing with packs? Like, do you have testers that you trust their opinion, or are you just kind of winging it?
More, more the winging it. As good as that sounds. So with a lot of the design stuff, at least in the most of the design phase, I'm iterating fast enough that you're not simultaneously going to like be testing it for like durability at that stage. That comes later. Like at first, you're just like, how do we get the basic shape right? How do we get the pockets right? And usually you can tell like the day you get a prototype, you're like, that's not going to work. So you don't need to send it out to like a whole bunch of people. You can tell. And I feel like I can get it kind of like 90% of the way there, just like through experience and just common sense of like what's going to work and all that kind of stuff. So we do all these iterations where I draw it up, send it to the factory. A month or two later, we get the sample, and then we go back and forth. We do maybe like 3, 4, 5, sometimes like 6, 7, 8, trying to get like it really dialed in. And then for testers, I'll usually just give it to like friends that I know are going to be hiking a lot and I value their feedback. There's, I think, a danger in like testing like too much, not too much, but like if you just give it to 100 people and you get 100 opinions and then you're like kind of designing by committee again, and maybe that like vision you got, you do want to find, so I more want to find problems than I really want to like ask for ideas. But I find that
Yeah.
like when you send gear to like gear testers, everybody's excited because it is awesome. But they're like, hey, I like the pack. Like, here's like 50 things that you could do differently. But you've like already like they don't know all your reasons for stuff, and it's like, and it's kind of just late in the game too to like do that. You're more looking for problems. Like, does this rub on that and lead to an issue?
Yeah. I think as a gear tester myself, that's one of the biggest things I've had to try to rein in is trying to figure out what problems have already been considered, and is the implementation of it already the best possible solution for the problem. Like, people smarter
Right.
than me have thought about this already. Like, I'm not the first person to realize that, like, oh, this pack rubs a little bit weird in this particular spot. um I want to talk about pack fabric for a second. Remind me, was that original pack, was that a DCF pack?
Originally, it was X Pack.
X pack, okay.
Yeah.
What do you think about Ultra?
I'm excited about it. So we're going to be using it on the new updated pack that we're launching in like 2 weeks.
Oh
Um,
wow, I didn't realize that was that close. Okay, cool.
yeah, it's close. It's I took all the product photos of it last night, and wow, is it so much? This is my first time taking product photos of a backpack. So much easier than a tent. Like tents, like I mean, it's in my basement, and like it's just like I don't know. It's I think you're always in my basement. You're always too close to a tent. You should probably like stand back and zoom in so it's not like distorted. But anyways,
It
the
also
backpack is
also an
awesome.
indicator of your life is like in the cottage industry world, that like you're doing your own product photos, right? Like in your basement.
Totally, yeah. I have like the white sheet like on the
Uh
wall. It
huh.
was like twenty
Uh huh.
dollars. Yeah, all that stuff. It's kind of funny because like we do have like obviously our factory's really awesome and like that part of it's like bigger, but like the design testing like ideas, it's just like it's super like cottagey grassroots. Um, so for Ultra, definitely the idea sounds amazing. Like that you would have like ultra high molecular weight polyethylene, like it's the best fiber. You're gonna weave it. You're gonna put it on the outside where it actually is performing that critical step instead of inside like hybrid DCF. I never really thought hybrid DCF made that much sense because for most of your kind of critical like abrasion things like that, it's on the inside where by the time you get down to it, your pack's already kind of trashed. So putting it on the outside in a much higher weight like makes total sense. And then everything about it seems great. it's lighter, all that kind of stuff. Um, there's always like maybe more that you could do. Like they still have about 30% polyester in there, so that the plastic backing can stick better. I mean, maybe one day we can get to 100%, but from talking to the Challenge, they say you basically need it to make it the composite, to make that plastic backing on there. So I think it's the future. Like I think woven, ultra high molecular weight PE is exactly what you want to pack.
Awesome. Well, as we wrap up, what's something about you or your company that you'd like to leave with the listeners kind of as a parting thought?
I am hugely grateful to our community because we have like awesome fans that have really been what's made this all possible. Like I'm having a great time designing gear, and we're not like slick corporate people. We don't pay to advertise or anything. I wouldn't even really know where to start. It's all really possible just because people are stoked. They tell people, that kind of thing. And so like a huge thank you to like everyone that has been a part of that and spreading the word. And I'm gonna try to keep making cool gear and hope people like it.
Awesome. Well, can't wait. Can't wait to see the pack. Can't wait to see the XMID Pro 1P. I'm really excited about that. Can you tell me how much it weighs, or is that still under wraps?
um, yeah, it's gonna be as light as I can get it.
Okay. I figured it was still under wraps. It just never hurts to ask.
Yeah, I'm really excited about what I might be able to do. I just don't want to overpromise because it's actually amazingly hard. Because if you shorten a 2-piece shelter, you still have like the zippers and the mesh walls and like the same reinforcement. You just kind of get rid of a strip of DCF that's actually not that much weight and the strip of floor. But anyways, there's some other things that we're working on to try to get as much weight off it as we can and really make it kind of down around the 1 pound mark.
Awesome. All right. Well, we're looking forward to it. Dan, thank you so much for taking time out of your family life to join us on the podcast. It's been a fantastic conversation. Really enjoyed it.
Yeah, thanks, Andrew.
Well, that's going to do it for this public version of the Backpacking Light podcast. If you'd like to hear the full interview, where Dan and I go into details about the XMID Pro 2, designing for Dyneema composite fabric, his adventures in the Bob Marshall Wilderness, how his outdoor philosophy informs his design philosophy, and more, head on over to backpackinglight.com/subscribe right now to become a member. You can download the show notes for this episode at backpackinglight.com/podcast. And if you enjoyed this episode, please leave us a review. It really does help other people find the show. Thanks for listening to the Backpacking Light podcast. I'm Andrew Marshall. And if I can leave you with one parting message, it's this: pack less, be more, because lighter is better. Happy trails, everybody.
So I shoulder my